Mordin saw the Garrock before it saw him. It was coming slowly up the slope, its huge belly sticking out in front, giving it a ponderous, rolling gait that was almost comical. He crouched lower behind the rocks, glad to be downwind of the creature. Its corpulence belied the animal ferocity beneath, the huge furry paws, sheathed claws hard and sharp as steel, and the downy face with its drooping moustache hid rows of vicious, pointed teeth. It was a fool who underestimated this predator. The hunter gingerly traced the tip of the ragged scar that ran from his left collarbone to his right hip, remembering how he learned that lesson. When he first came to this strange land, he had been fooled by the Garrock. Finding a young one caught in a man-trap, mewling woefully, a look of hopelessness in its bovine eyes, he had taken pity on the creature, thinking it looked harmless enough. The thing was no sooner free than it attacked, rending and tearing with its claws, trying to fasten its teeth into Mordin's throat. The fight was long and bloody, the hunter finally smashing the Garrock's skull with the very man-trap from which he had freed it. Mordin nearly lost an arm that day, learning well that nothing could be taken for granted here. Mordin was brought fully alert by a sudden change in the air. The wind shifted to the north. The foul reek of the Garrock's matted coat no longer assaulted his nostrils. The Garrock stopped on the path and sniffed the air. Mordin could see the hard muscle beneath the shaggy fur as the beast reared up on its massive legs, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent. The hunter realized he was no longer downwind of the Garrock. It was downwind of him. Head back, fangs dripping with slime, the Garrock roared a deafening challenge and charged. Mordin felt Death's icy hand at his back in the traitorous wind. Forcing down his fear, he knocked an arrow to his short bow. The weapon was useless against the creature's natural armour. Using the focus of a hunter, he sighted on the Garrock's eye. Time seemed to slow as the beast came within range. Mordin could smell the fetid breath from its gaping maw. He breathed deeply, drew his bow, held for a second, and loosed his arrow, breathing out slowly as if to guide its course. The arrow sped towards the fatal point, but went wide as the Garrock suddenly veered to the right. It leapt over the rocks, still screaming its challenge. Mordin rolled onto his back, dropping his bow and reaching for his sword. The beast, dripping spittle and filth, passed over him. It landed, grunting its rage, but did not turn to face the hunter. Over its shoulder, Mordin could see the object of the Garrock's fury. Below the crest of the hill stood a large, muscular man. He was dressed in fine leather armour, with bronze on the chest, arms and shins, which glinted in the lowering sun. He wore no helm, and his long dark hair blew wildly in the rising wind as he raised his sword to answer the beast's challenge. Mordin stood and quietly sheathed his blade. Realizing that, for the moment, he was safe, he picked up his bow and backed around the rocks. He knew he should leave. He had no loyalty to the stranger and was anxious to be on his journey. But something about this man drew him in. He couldn't place what it was, so he decided to wait and watch. The warrior stood firm, sword raised high, feet planted wide, ready to meet the Garrock's assault. His face was set in a grim smile. His eyes, dark, narrowed against the setting sun, showed no fear. The Garrock opened its frothing jaws and roared once more before it lowered its massive head and charged for a final time. The man leapt to the left to avoid the slavering mouth, bringing his sword down in a mighty blow that cut deep into the beast's muscled shoulder. The Garrock reeled in pain. Howling with anger, its claws flashed in the reddening light, tearing open a long gash in the swordsman's thigh. The mingling blood of beast and man fell to the ground. The man struggled to keep his footing on the gore-soaked grass. With the balance of an experienced warrior, he spun on his toes, plunging his sword down just behind the Garrock's head, severing its spine. Its screech of anger cut off, the beast fell. its limbs twitching feebly as blood soaked into its matted fur and its life ebbed away into the dirt. The warrior planted one foot on the creature's back, grunting loudly as he pulled his sword free. He wiped his blade with a handful of dry grass and, sheathing it, looked down the slope. He called out, his voice deep and powerful, carrying a hint of mirth. "Show yourself, rock crawler. I'm in no mood for hide and seek, and I believe you owe me your life." With a low chuckle he sat down on the grass to examine his wound, ignoring the carcass of the garrock nearby. Mordin emerged cautiously from his hiding place and walked towards the warrior, feeling a sudden, unexpected wave of shame for not having aided the now wounded man. Mordin quickened his pace. He skirted the body of the garrock and, squatting down before the swordsman, offered up his water skin. Up close, Mordin could see that the garrock should have been no match for the swordsman. The hard, corded muscles stood out on his arms and legs. His hands, big enough to crush a man's head, worked with amazing skill and dexterity as he daubed salve on his wound and deftly stitched the flesh with needle and sinew. His bronze skin was marked by the scars of battle. Mordin judged from their size that some of the wounds would have been enough to kill most men. Mordin could also see that the warrior's armour, though polished and well cared for, bore battle scars as numerous as the man, the leather soft and worn in places through long, hard use. Reaching out to take the water skin, the man nodded to Mordin. He took a long draught, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and with a grin, threw the skin back. Mordin caught the skin in mid-air, but looked away when the warrior sought his eyes, seating himself warily upon the grass. Seeing Mordin's discomfort, the man's grin widened. "Fear not, hunter," he laughed. "I count you no blame for my injury. If I were less travel-worn, I would never have let the monster gore me." A slight tightening around the eyes was all that betrayed his pain as the warrior settled himself into a cross-legged position. He reached into his belt pouch and drew out 2 shriveled winter apples. Tossing one to Mordin, he proceeded to devour his own with relish. Not wishing to offend the man, Mordin bit gingerly into the apple's wrinkled brown flesh. He was overwhelmed by the rush of flavour and sensation. Inside its skin the fruit was soft and moist. The rich juices slaked his thirst like the purest spring water. His mouth was filled with the tart sweetness of early apples and the mellow warmth of wild berries. He lingered over the succulent flesh, savouring every bite. He felt the weariness he had so long carried ease from his body, and warmth course through his limbs. His heart and mind were invigorated, as though a great weight had been removed. He finished the apple, licking the last drops of juice from his fingers like a hungry child, then suddenly remembered he was in company. Looking up, he saw the warrior watching him, and smiling. "What was that? It was wonderful," he asked. "I feel renewed." The warrior nodded. "Apples, nothing more," he replied. "They were given to me as a parting gift from a noble lady, nurtured by her own hand. They used to grow wild in these parts many years ago. I hope they will again." Feeling emboldened, Mordin held the man's gaze for a moment. Despite the battle scars and hardened body, he could sense no evil in the swordsman. His eyes were black and glittering as onyx, but sparkled with life and humour. The strong-jawed, sun-darkened face was softened by a smile, and Mordin felt no fear of him. "I at least owe him some thanks," he thought. "My apologies for not coming to your aid sooner," he began. The warrior laughed again. "No need for that," he smiled. "As I said, it should have been no contest, but I am travel-worn and battle-weary." He paused and looked out across the rolling hills to where the sun was at last melting into the horizon, pouring liquid gold and fire into the sky. "I was foolish," he said with a derisory chuckle. "I have been many days without sleep, but I was so invigorated by the sight of my homeland. Walking these hills made me feel like a boy again. Glancing at the body of the Garruk, he shook his head ruefully. Only a boy would be careless enough to let his guard down like that. Looking back to the hunter, he nodded and gestured for him to continue. Mordin raised his hand in grateful agreement that the matter was settled. "I feel I should introduce myself at least," he said. "I am Mordin Natal, a hunter and traveller in these lands." Remembering the gift of the apple, he continued, "I thank you for your generosity. I fear water and some black bread are all I may offer in return, and I do not think they will stand up in comparison." At this, both men laughed together, and the final thread of tension seemed broken. Mordin held out his hand. The swordsmen responded, each gripping other by the forearm. "Well met, Mordin Natal. I am Bryneth Penvallen, and I see from your face that my name is familiar to you." All colour had drained from Mordin's face. His usually schooled countenance could not conceal his shock. Bryneth Penvallen, exiled brother of the king, disgraced commander of the southern armies, had returned.